In the quiet corridors of a small city music academy, there worked an old janitor who everyone barely noticed. He moved slowly, pushing his cleaning cart along the halls, carrying buckets, mops, and the soft smell of polish that lingered behind him. Every morning before the students arrived, he swept the floors, wiped the doors, and made sure every classroom was spotless. He did his job with care, though no one ever really thanked him. To most people, he was just the janitor, the man who cleaned up after everyone else. The students walked past him with their instruments, chatting and laughing about lessons, concerts, and grades. Sometimes they greeted him politely, but often they didn't even look up. Teachers gave him quick nods, rushing to their next class. He didn't seem to mind. He kept his head down, working quietly, humming faint tunes that no one paid attention to. Yet if anyone had stopped to listen carefully, they would have noticed that the melodies he hummed weren't random. They were beautiful, thoughtful, and filled with emotion. At night, after the last student had gone home and the halls were silent, he stayed a little longer. He would make sure every room was locked, every chair was in place, and every light was turned off except one. The grand piano in the main hall stood under a soft beam of light, its surface shining. He would always pause there. Sometimes he would wipe the dust off its polished body, his hands gentle, almost affectionate. His eyes would soften, like he was looking at something precious from another time. For a moment he would stand still, just staring at the piano keys. Then he'd sigh quietly as if holding back a memory. Some nights his fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly, but then he'd pull them away, shaking his head. He would put his cleaning cloth back on the piano lid, pick up his mop, and walk out into the darkness of the hall. The next morning, life would return to normal. Students hurried in and out of rooms. The sound of violins, flutes, and voices filled the building. The janitor continued his work, mopping, sweeping, fixing things that broke. He was always calm, always patient, but sometimes he would pause near the practice rooms listening. When someone played something beautiful, he'd close his eyes for a brief moment and smile. It was as if the music reminded him of something he once loved deeply. One afternoon, a few students sat on the stairs, laughing between classes. The janitor walked by with his mop and bucket. One of them whispered loudly, "He probably doesn't even know what music is." Another added, "Yeah, he just cleans up our mess." They laughed, not realizing he could hear every word. The janitor didn't stop. He just smiled faintly as if used to it. But when he reached the end of the hallway, his shoulders lowered a little and his steps grew slower. That evening, the same group stayed late for rehearsal. The janitor quietly moved around, collecting trash and straightening chairs. As they packed up to leave, one of them dropped a soda can near his freshly cleaned floor. "Oops," they said with a smirk, not bothering to pick it up. He simply bent down, picked it up, and threw it away without a word. It wasn't anger that filled his face. It was something softer, like sadness mixed with understanding. When everyone finally left, the academy fell silent again. The lights dimmed. Outside, the city was covered in the soft glow of street lamps. Inside, only the sound of his footsteps echoed. He walked to the main hall as he always did. The grand piano sat in the center, waiting in the quiet. He wiped the surface slowly, his fingers tracing the smooth wood like it was a dear old friend. Then he sat down. He hesitated at first. His hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. The room was still, as if holding its breath. Then he pressed one note. The sound rang out clear and warm. It was followed by another and then another. Soon the air filled with a soft, emotional melody. His fingers began to move faster, smoother, more confident. The notes flowed like a river, gentle, deep, full of memories. His eyes closed as he played, his face calm but filled with feeling. Each chord carried a story only he could tell. If anyone had walked in at that moment, they would have never believed it. The man who mopped floors and fixed doors was now sitting at the grand piano, playing with the skill and grace of a concert pianist. The music rose and fell like waves, sometimes tender, sometimes powerful. It sounded like sorrow turning into hope. His old hands moved with purpose, his shoulders swayed gently with each phrase. When the last note faded into silence, he sat there quietly, eyes still closed. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it quickly, as if embarrassed, even though no one was there. Then he smiled faintly. "Good enough for tonight," he whispered to himself. He stood up, closed the piano lid carefully, and turned off the light. The next morning, no one knew what had happened the night before. The students walked in, chatting, complaining about homework and rehearsals. The janitor was already there, mopping near the entrance. Everything seemed normal, but something about him felt a little different that day. His steps seemed lighter, his eyes brighter. When a student accidentally dropped a folder of sheet music, he rushed to help her pick it up. She thanked him, and for the first time she noticed the warmth in his smile. Days passed like that. The janitor continued his quiet routine. But sometimes, when the building was empty, soft music drifted from the hall again. No one knew where it came from, and those who heard it thought it was just someone practicing late. But it wasn't. It was the same man everyone ignored, pouring his soul into the keys when no one was watching. One evening, a young student came back to the academy to collect a forgotten notebook. The hall was supposed to be empty, but she heard something. A melody floated through the air, gentle, sorrowful, and unbelievably beautiful. She followed the sound, her footsteps slow and careful. When she reached the main hall, she stopped at the door and peered inside. There he was, the janitor, sitting at the grand piano, his head slightly bowed, eyes closed, playing as if the world had disappeared. The girl froze, her breath caught. She had never heard anything like it before. His fingers danced across the keys with effortless grace. The music filled every corner of the room, wrapping it in warmth and emotion. She didn't move, afraid the slightest sound would break the spell. When the piece ended, the janitor sat quietly for a moment, still lost in thought. Then he sighed and reached for his cleaning cloth. That was when the girl accidentally made a small sound, the creak of a floorboard. The janitor turned around, startled. Their eyes met. For a second, neither spoke. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." He smiled gently, shaking his head. "It's all right," he replied. "You just surprised me." "You play beautifully," she whispered, almost in awe. Why do you never play when people are around?" He looked down at the piano keys and smiled faintly. "Because people don't expect the janitor to know music," he said quietly. "It's easier to let them believe what they want." The girl's eyes filled with curiosity. "But you should let them hear you," she insisted. "They'd be amazed." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Maybe someday," he said. Then he stood up, picked up his mop, and started walking away. That night, the girl went home with the sound of his music still echoing in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The man everyone ignored had more talent in his hands than anyone she knew. She decided she wouldn't keep it a secret. The next morning, while the students gathered before class, she whispered to her friends about what she saw. Most of them laughed, thinking she was joking. Our janitor? Playing the piano like that? No way. But she knew what she had heard, and deep down she knew it was only a matter of time before everyone else did too. That was how it began. The story of a man the world had overlooked, who had once been a dreamer, a musician, and who still carried music quietly in his heart. No one yet knew the truth about him. But soon the halls he cleaned every day would echo with his music again. The next morning, the air inside the academy was filled with the usual noise of footsteps and chatter. Students carried their instruments through the halls, teachers called out reminders, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the teacher's lounge. Everything looked the same, but one young student kept glancing toward the janitor as he mopped the floors near the staircase. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen the night before, the way his fingers moved over the piano keys, the sound of the music that still echoed in her mind. She wanted to tell everyone, but she also worried they would laugh at her again. Still, by lunchtime, the story had already begun to spread. Whispers moved from one student to another. "Did you hear what she said? The janitor can play the piano." Some laughed, others shrugged, and a few looked curious. "Maybe she imagined it," one of them said. "Maybe she just heard a recording." The girl stayed quiet, but deep down she knew what she had seen was real. That evening, a small group of students decided to stay late. They wanted to find out if the story was true. After their last rehearsal, they hid near the main hall, waiting. The janitor came in as usual, carrying his bucket and mop. He worked quietly, unaware that he was being watched. He dusted the piano, arranged the chairs, and checked the lights. Then, just like before, he sat down on the piano bench. His shoulders relaxed, and for a moment he simply stared at the keys. The students held their breath. Then softly he began to play. The melody started gentle like a whisper. It was slow at first, then grew stronger, filling the room with warmth. The students were frozen in place listening. They had never heard anything like it. Each note seemed to tell a story, one of sadness, hope, and love. His hands moved so smoothly it didn't seem possible that this was the same man they had seen mopping floors every day. They looked at each other wide-eyed, realizing the truth. The janitor wasn't just playing. He was performing with the heart of someone who had lived through every emotion his music carried. When the last note faded, he sat still, lost in thought. He sighed softly and began to stand up. That was when one of the students accidentally bumped into a chair, making a loud noise. The janitor turned sharply, startled. His eyes met theirs, and for a moment no one spoke. The students stepped forward awkwardly, unsure what to say. One of them finally blurted out, "Sir, that was amazing." He blinked, surprised, and then gave a small smile. "You shouldn't be here so late," he said quietly. "It's not safe." "But you were playing," another student said, almost pleading. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone you could play like that?" The janitor hesitated. His hand rested on the piano lid. "Because no one asked," he said softly. "And because it doesn't matter now." The students exchanged confused glances. "Of course it matters," one of them said. "You play better than half the teachers here." He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "You're kind, but I think I'm too old for all that." He began to gather his cleaning supplies, trying to end the conversation. But before he could leave, the youngest student spoke up. "Please play one more," she said. "Just one more song." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something sincere in her voice, something that reminded him of another time. Slowly, he sat down again. He placed his hands on the keys, and this time he played something soft and sweet, a melody that felt like a lullaby. The students watched quietly, their eyes shining. When he finished, the youngest student whispered, "That was beautiful." He smiled faintly. "Thank you," he said. "Now go home, all of you. You've got classes tomorrow." They nodded and left, whispering excitedly as they disappeared down the hall. The janitor sat there alone for a few more minutes, staring at the piano. For the first time in years, he felt seen, but a part of him still didn't know if that was a good thing. The next day, everyone seemed to know. Some students looked at him differently, whispering as he passed. A few even smiled at him, which surprised him. The teachers, too, began to hear rumors. "The janitor can play the piano," they said with disbelief. One teacher even laughed, saying, "Maybe he can also conduct the orchestra." But not everyone found it funny. The music teacher, a kind woman with a love for classical pieces, grew curious. That evening, she stayed behind to see for herself. When the academy grew quiet, she walked toward the hall. The lights were dim, and there, just as she had been told, the janitor sat at the grand piano. She stood near the doorway, hidden in the shadows, listening. The music he played was full of soul. It was the kind of performance that could only come from someone who had lived through both pain and beauty. She didn't interrupt until he finished. "That was incredible," she said softly, stepping forward. The janitor turned, startled again. "Oh, I didn't know anyone was here," he said quickly, standing up. "I was just passing time." "You weren't just passing time," she replied with a smile. "That was real music. You have a gift." He looked down. "It's an old gift," he said quietly. "I used to play a long time ago." "Then why stop?" she asked gently. He hesitated. His eyes grew distant, as if remembering something painful. "Life got in the way," he said finally. "Sometimes you have to let go of dreams to take care of what matters." The teacher nodded, understanding. "Still," she said, "you shouldn't hide it. People need to hear music like that." He smiled faintly but didn't answer. When she left, he sat down again, staring at the keys. Her words echoed in his mind. Maybe people did need to hear it, but he wasn't sure he had the courage anymore. The following week, things began to change. Students started greeting him more kindly. Some asked questions about music, pretending it was casual conversation. One even brought him a small cup of coffee and said, "For the best pianist in the building." He laughed and thanked them, but deep down he didn't know how to feel. It was strange to be noticed after so many years of silence. One afternoon, as he cleaned the hall, a small crowd of students gathered near the piano. "Play something for us, please," they called out. He tried to refuse. "I have work to do," he said. But they didn't give up. Finally, he gave in, sitting down slowly. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. The music filled the air, soft at first, then more powerful. Students watched in silence, their smiles fading into awe. When he finished, they clapped loudly, cheering and shouting his name. For a moment he felt young again. After they left, he sat quietly, thinking. The applause reminded him of days long gone. Concerts, bright lights, and his wife's proud smile in the audience. But those days were over now. Or at least he thought they were. Later that evening, the principal of the academy heard about what had happened. He called the janitor into his office. "I've been hearing stories," the principal said kindly. "People say you have quite the talent." The janitor smiled politely. "It's nothing special," he said humbly. "Just old habits." "Well," the principal continued, "the annual student concert is coming up. How would you feel about performing something?" The janitor's eyes widened. "Me? Oh no, sir, I couldn't. I'm just the janitor." The principal leaned forward. "You're part of this academy, too. And from what I hear, you might just inspire our students." The janitor didn't know what to say. He nodded slowly, unsure. When he left the office, his mind was spinning. Perform again? After all these years? The idea scared him. But it also lit a small flame inside, a feeling he hadn't felt in decades. That night, as he cleaned the hall once more, he sat down at the piano and began to play again. This time his hands shook at first, but soon they steadied. The music filled the room, and as he played, he imagined the faces of the students, the principal, and the teacher who had encouraged him. Maybe this was his second chance. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and the sound of his music floated into the night, gentle but strong. For the first time in many years, the janitor felt something he thought he had lost: hope. The following days at the academy felt different. The janitor had become the quiet center of attention. Wherever he went, people whispered softly, pointing toward him. Some were amazed by his hidden talent, while others were simply curious. A few didn't believe the stories at all, thinking it was just a rumor that grew bigger each time it was told. But those who had actually heard him play knew it was real. They couldn't forget the sound of that music, the feeling it carried. One afternoon, while he was sweeping the hallway near the main entrance, a group of students walked by carrying their instruments. They smiled at him and stopped. "Sir, will you play again tonight?" one of them asked eagerly. He looked up from his broom, a little surprised. "Play?" he repeated. "Oh, I think you've already heard enough of that." The students shook their heads. "No, please. We want to hear more." He chuckled softly. "I have work to do," he said kindly. But there was warmth in his voice. It was strange to him that people suddenly wanted to listen. For so long, he had played only for himself and the memories he carried. Now others were asking to share that moment. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. Later that evening, when the halls emptied out, he found himself once again in front of the grand piano. The lights above shone softly, making the room glow with a calm golden hue. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play, just as he always did, quietly, from the heart. What he didn't know was that this time, more than a dozen students stood outside the door listening silently. The music drifted through the hallways like a whisper, wrapping around every corner. It was slow and gentle, full of emotion, each note carrying something unspoken. The students didn't dare interrupt. When the last note faded, one of them opened the door carefully and stepped inside. "That was beautiful," the student said softly. The janitor turned, startled. Behind the student, more faces appeared, smiling shyly. "We didn't mean to bother you," one of them said. "We just wanted to listen." He looked at them, unsure what to say. A part of him wanted to be angry. They had invaded his quiet time. But another part of him felt something he hadn't felt in years: appreciation. These young faces weren't mocking him. They were inspired. The next day, the story spread even faster. Teachers began to talk about it in the staff room. "Have you heard about the janitor who plays like a professional?" one asked. The others laughed at first, but curiosity soon replaced disbelief. Even the principal heard about it again, and this time he decided to take it seriously. He wanted to see the truth with his own eyes. That evening, the janitor was finishing his shift when the principal appeared in the main hall. "I hope I'm not interrupting," the principal said kindly. The janitor turned, surprised. "No, sir, I was just finishing up." The principal smiled. "I've heard a lot about your playing. Would you mind giving me a small performance?" The janitor hesitated. "I'm not really a performer anymore," he said quietly. "I just play for myself." But the principal wouldn't take no for an answer. "Just one song," he insisted. "For an old man like me?" After a moment of silence, the janitor nodded slowly. He sat down at the piano. His fingers rested on the keys, trembling slightly. Then he began to play a soft, emotional piece that seemed to fill the air with stories untold. The principal stood still, completely silent. Each note spoke of love, loss, and the passage of time. When the final chord faded, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the lights. The principal's eyes glistened. "That was extraordinary," he said after a moment. "You have a gift that shouldn't be hidden. I want you to perform at the upcoming concert." The janitor's eyes widened. "The concert? Oh no, sir, that's for students, not for me." The principal shook his head. "Music belongs to everyone. You'll be our special guest." He wanted to refuse, but the principal's tone was firm yet gentle. "Think about it," the principal said before leaving. "You might inspire more people than you know." That night, the janitor sat on the piano bench long after everyone had gone. The idea of performing again terrified him. He hadn't played in front of a crowd in years, not since before his wife got sick. Those memories came rushing back, making his chest feel heavy. He remembered the nights she sat in the audience, smiling proudly as he performed. He remembered the sound of her laughter, the way she used to say, "Your music can heal hearts." But when she fell ill, everything changed. The concert stopped. The applause faded. He sold his piano to pay for her treatments, and after she was gone, the silence in his life became unbearable. That was when he stopped playing for others. Only after he started working at the academy did he touch the keys again, quietly when no one was around. It was the only way to feel close to her again. Now the thought of playing in front of people once more filled him with fear. What if he wasn't good enough anymore? What if people laughed? What if he broke down in the middle of the song? These thoughts haunted him, but deep down another voice whispered softly, "Maybe it's time." The next few days passed quickly. Students began to prepare for the concert. The girl who had first discovered his secret smiled at him each morning, as if silently encouraging him. Teachers greeted him warmly now, some even stopping to chat for a few minutes. It was strange and a little overwhelming, but it also made him feel alive. One afternoon, the principal met him again. "So have you decided?" he asked. The janitor looked down, unsure. "I don't know if I can do it, sir," he admitted. "It's been so long." The principal smiled gently. "Talent doesn't fade. It just waits for the right moment to shine again. Maybe this is your moment." That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by his small window, staring out at the city lights, thinking about everything he had lost and everything he still had. The music inside him had never truly gone away. It had just been sleeping. Slowly a decision formed in his heart. Maybe it was time to let it wake up again. The next morning he walked into the principal's office and nodded. "I'll do it," he said simply. The principal's face lit up. "Wonderful. We'll make sure everything's ready." From that day forward, the janitor began practicing after hours, just like before. But this time he didn't play alone. Sometimes students stayed behind to listen quietly, offering encouragement. The music teacher even brought him sheet music and helped him prepare. They worked together in the evenings, fine-tuning each note. At first his fingers were stiff, and he stumbled over parts he used to play perfectly. But slowly his confidence returned. Each night the sound grew stronger, fuller, more alive. As the concert day drew closer, excitement spread through the academy. Posters were hung on the walls. Students whispered about the special performance. Some didn't believe it would actually happen. Others couldn't wait. The janitor tried to stay calm, but every time he walked past the stage, his heart beat a little faster. Finally, the night arrived. The concert hall was filled with students, parents, and teachers. The lights glowed softly over the stage. The janitor stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the crowd. The principal came over and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You'll do fine," he said with a smile. "Just play from your heart." When it was his turn, the principal stepped onto the stage and spoke into the microphone. "Tonight we have a special guest," he announced. "Someone who reminds us that true talent never fades, no matter where life takes us. Please welcome our very own janitor." The audience fell silent. The janitor took a deep breath and walked out. The lights were bright, and for a moment he could barely see the faces in the crowd. He sat down at the grand piano, the same one he had cleaned so many times. His reflection shimmered faintly on its polished surface. He closed his eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft, trembling slightly, but then the music found its rhythm. The melody rose like a voice long kept silent, finally speaking again. Each note carried pieces of his life, the struggles, the love, the loss, and the quiet strength that had kept him going. The audience sat in complete silence, some with tears in their eyes. Even the students who had once laughed at him were now moved beyond words. When the final note faded, the hall was silent for a moment. Then all at once applause filled the air. It was thunderous, endless. The janitor looked up startled, his eyes wet with emotion. He stood slowly, bowing his head in gratitude. The principal joined him on stage, clapping with a proud smile. That night, as he walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, the janitor felt lighter than he had in years. The world had seen him, not as just a man with a mop, but as someone with music in his soul. For the first time in a long time, he felt like himself again. After the concert, the academy was buzzing. Students and teachers alike could not stop talking about the janitor's performance. People who had once ignored him now treated him with a kind of respect he had not experienced in decades. Even the principal complimented him repeatedly, and some parents sent letters expressing their admiration. But the janitor, who was now walking quietly through the hallways, felt a mix of pride and unease. He had shared his music with the world, but there was still a part of his life that few understood. One afternoon, the music teacher invited him into her office. She smiled warmly and gestured for him to sit. "You played beautifully at the concert," she began, "but I feel like there is more to your story. Will you tell me about it?" The janitor looked down at his hands. He hadn't thought anyone would ask. "It's been a long time," he said quietly. "A very long time?" She nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Take your time. I'm here to listen." He took a deep breath and began to speak. He told her about his early life, how he had been trained as a pianist in his youth. Music had always been his first love. He had traveled for performances, competed in recitals, and dreamed of a life full of music. His wife had always been by his side, supporting him, attending every performance, and sharing in his joys and sorrows. He smiled faintly as he recalled her proud face in the audience. Then he told her about the illness. His wife had grown sick, and he had to make a difficult choice: continue chasing his dream or support her. He chose her. The concert stopped, the travels ended, and he stayed home caring for her. When she passed away, the music in his life faded with her. He sold his piano to cover her treatments, thinking that it would help him move forward. But it had only left him empty. The music teacher listened intently, her eyes filled with understanding. "You carried all of that in your heart," she said softly. "And now finally you've shared some of it again." He nodded, feeling a weight lift slightly from his shoulders. "It's strange," he said. "For so long I thought my music was gone. I thought it had no place in the world anymore. But when I play, it's like a part of me comes alive again." The teacher smiled. "It's never too late to share your gift. Talent like yours doesn't disappear. It waits for the right moment." That evening, as the academy emptied, the janitor walked to the piano and sat down. He played quietly, letting the emotions flow. But this time he didn't just play for himself. He played for his wife, for the students who had finally recognized him, for the teachers who had encouraged him, and for the world that he had almost forgotten. Each note seemed to carry decades of love, pain, and hope. Word of his story began to spread outside the academy. Some of the students shared what they had learned with friends and family. Local newspapers and online communities started talking about the janitor who had once been a promising pianist and had returned to music in his later years. People were amazed that someone who seemed ordinary could have such extraordinary talent and a story full of resilience and heartache. With each day, more students came to him not just to listen, but to ask questions. They wanted to learn, to understand, to feel the music the way he did. He began teaching small lessons after school, showing them how to feel the music, not just play it. He spoke gently, encouraging them to explore their own emotions and express themselves through sound. Students were captivated by his passion, his patience, and the way he treated each note with care. One afternoon, a group of students stayed late for rehearsal and invited him to join them. At first, he declined, saying, "I'm not here to perform with you. I'm just a janitor." But they insisted, and after a moment of hesitation, he agreed. Sitting at the piano, he played along with the violin, flute, and cello. The music blended beautifully. Students watched in awe, realizing that the janitor wasn't just talented. He could also guide and inspire them. His presence became a source of encouragement, showing them that perseverance, even after loss, could lead to moments of profound beauty. As weeks passed, the janitor's life began to feel fuller. The academy was no longer just a workplace. It was a place where he could reconnect with his passion and share it with others. The students had become his audience, his collaborators, and his companions. Teachers sought his opinion on musical arrangements, and the principal even suggested organizing a special recital featuring him alongside the students. The janitor was nervous at first. He had not performed publicly in decades, and the thought of standing on stage in front of so many people was daunting. But he agreed, motivated by the desire to continue his wife's memory through music. He practiced diligently, refining each piece with careful attention. Every evening, after completing his cleaning duties, he would sit at the piano, letting the music flow naturally, losing himself in the melodies. When the day of the special recital arrived, the academy hall was filled with anticipation. Students, teachers, and families gathered, excited to hear the janitor perform once more. The lights highlighted the grand piano at center stage. Behind it, he took a deep breath, steadying his hands and heart. He thought of his wife, of the years lost, and of the students who had given him courage. For the first time in a long time, he felt ready. As he began to play, the hall was filled with music that told a story words could not capture. Each chord resonated with emotion, each note carrying a history of love, sacrifice, and resilience. The audience listened in silence, completely captivated. Students who had once dismissed him as just a janitor now sat with wide eyes and quiet admiration. Teachers watched, moved by the depth of feeling he conveyed through his performance. When the final note echoed into silence, the hall erupted into applause. The janitor stood slowly, bowing deeply. Tears filled his eyes as he realized that his music had touched the hearts of many, just as it had once touched his own. He felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that he had not known for years. The performance was more than just a recital. It was a celebration of life, love, and the courage to embrace one's true self. Even after years of hardship, after the recital, students surrounded him asking questions, sharing their thoughts and expressing admiration. They wanted to learn not only how to play the piano, but also how to carry themselves with the same quiet strength and perseverance that he had shown. The janitor smiled, answering patiently, offering guidance and encouragement. He realized that music had not only returned to his life, but it also created a connection that would last far beyond the walls of the academy. From that day forward, the janitor's life transformed. He continued his work, but now his days were filled with music, teaching, and inspiration. The students looked up to him, not just as someone with talent, but as a symbol of resilience, dedication, and the beauty of sharing one's gift with the world. The halls that he had once simply cleaned now echoed with melodies, laughter, and admiration. The janitor, who had once been invisible, had become a cherished part of the academy, a reminder that true talent and perseverance can never be truly hidden. The weeks after the special recital were filled with excitement and change. The janitor had become more than just a caretaker of the academy. He had become a source of inspiration and guidance. Students stopped to greet him in the hallways, asking questions about music, life, and perseverance. Teachers approached him for advice on arranging compositions, and the principal considered giving him a small role in future school events. The janitor, who had once walked quietly through the halls without notice, now carried himself with a quiet dignity and a gentle smile. One afternoon, a group of students approached him with a suggestion. "Sir," one of them said hesitantly, "the academy is hosting a student talent showcase next month. Would you consider performing again? We think it would encourage everyone." The janitor shook his head at first. "I don't know," he said softly. "I have never performed like this for a large audience before, and I don't want to take attention away from the students." "But that's exactly why you should do it," another student argued. "You've shown us that age, life challenges, or even our day jobs don't define who we are. Performing again will show everyone what dedication really means." The janitor paused, thinking. He remembered his wife's encouragement, her belief that his music could heal hearts and inspire others. He felt a warmth spread through him. Perhaps this was the right moment to share more of his story through music, to show that life, even with its hardships, could produce beauty. When the night of the talent showcase arrived, the hall was packed. Students, teachers, and families filled every seat. The lights were soft, highlighting the center stage where a grand piano stood. The janitor waited backstage, heart pounding. He was nervous more than he had been during the special recital, but he knew he had to go through with it. The students who had encouraged him offered reassuring smiles and pats on his shoulder. When his turn came, the principal announced him as a special guest who had inspired the entire academy. The janitor walked onto the stage slowly, bowing his head to acknowledge the applause. He took a deep breath and sat at the piano, letting his fingers hover above the keys. The hall grew quiet, waiting for the first note. Then softly he began to play. The music flowed gently at first, a simple melody that gradually grew richer and more expressive. Each note carried the emotions of a lifetime, the love he had shared with his wife, the sorrow of losing her, the years of quiet sacrifice, and the joy of finally reconnecting with his music. The audience listened in silence, captivated. The students watched in awe, whispering to each other about how someone who had seemed ordinary could create such extraordinary sound. As the performance continued, the janitor's confidence grew. His fingers moved with ease, the music expressing what words never could. Every chord spoke of resilience and hope, every pause a reflection on life's struggles. The hall seemed to hold its breath as the final notes approached, and when he finished, there was a brief moment of silence before the applause erupted. It was loud, heartfelt, and lasted for minutes. Some in the audience were visibly moved to tears. The janitor stood slowly, bowing deeply to the crowd. For the first time, he felt the full impact of his journey. He had gone from being unnoticed and underestimated to being recognized for the talent and dedication he had kept hidden for decades. The applause was not just for his music, it was for the person he was, the choices he had made, and the courage it had taken to come back to what he loved. After the performance, students rushed to congratulate him. They asked about his life, his practice, and how he found the courage to perform again. Teachers and parents approached him with smiles, sharing their admiration. The principal spoke to him privately afterward, saying, "You have changed this academy. You've shown everyone that passion and talent can't be hidden forever." The janitor felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The music he had once thought was lost had returned, not just as notes on a piano, but as a connection to people. A bridge between past and present. He realized that sharing his music had not only inspired others, but had also healed a part of himself. In the weeks following the showcase, more students came to him for lessons. He taught them patiently, encouraging them to express their feelings through music. They learned not just how to play notes, but how to feel each chord, how to connect with the emotion behind the melody. The academy became alive with music that carried both talent and heart, and the janitor was at the center of it all, guiding and inspiring. The janitor also found time to reflect on his life. He remembered the long years when he thought his dreams had ended, and he felt gratitude for the chance to start again. He realized that his journey was not just about music, it was about resilience, hope, and the courage to embrace second chances. Through his story, he showed everyone around him that life could be difficult, but it could also be beautiful if one didn't give up. One evening, after a day of teaching, he sat at the grand piano alone. The academy was quiet, and the last rays of sunlight streamed through the windows. He began to play a gentle melody, a song he had once played for his wife. The music filled the room with warmth and memory. As he played, he thought about how far he had come, from a quiet janitor hidden in the halls to a man whose music now inspired many. It was a full-circle moment, one that reminded him that life could always offer new beginnings, even when the past seemed filled with loss. The janitor knew that the academy had become a place of connection, where music could heal and inspire, and where he was no longer invisible. He was respected, appreciated, and loved, not just for his talent, but for the story and spirit behind it. And as he closed the piano lid and walked through the halls, he carried with him a sense of fulfillment and joy, knowing that his music would continue to touch hearts for many years to come. After the talent showcase, the janitor's life changed in ways he had never imagined. Students and teachers approached him regularly, asking for guidance and lessons. The halls of the academy seemed brighter, filled with laughter, music, and curiosity. He had become more than a janitor. He was now a mentor, a teacher, and an inspiration to everyone around him. Yet, despite all the attention, he remained humble, quietly moving through the hallways and performing his duties with the same care as before. One afternoon, a young student approached him hesitantly. "Sir," the student began, "I know you've helped so many of us, but would you consider composing your own piece for the academy? Something unique that tells your story?" The janitor paused, surprised. He had never thought of himself as a composer. Music had always been a way to express his emotions, to heal his own heart. But the idea of creating something entirely new, something that carried his experiences, sparked something inside him. "I suppose I could try," he said slowly. "It would be different, but perhaps it's time." That evening, after completing his cleaning duties, he sat at the grand piano and began to experiment. At first, the notes were simple, tentative, as he explored melodies and harmonies. He remembered the moments of joy, sorrow, love, and loss in his life, letting each emotion guide his fingers. Slowly, the music grew richer, deeper, and more expressive. The melodies intertwined like memories, carrying the weight of years while also embracing hope for the future. As the piece developed, he realized it told a story of perseverance, love, and the power of second chances. He played the composition over and over, refining it, adding subtle nuances and letting the emotions flow freely. He imagined the students and teachers listening, feeling the same connection he had experienced when playing the works of others. Each note was a message, a reminder that life, despite its hardships, could be filled with beauty and meaning. Word began to spread that the janitor was composing a piece for the academy. Students were curious and excited, asking when they might hear it. Teachers encouraged him, offering advice on musical structure and expression. The janitor, who had once believed he was invisible, found himself surrounded by support and encouragement. It was a new experience, one that made him feel alive in ways he had not felt for decades. Weeks passed, and the composition was nearing completion. The janitor decided that the best way to share it would be during a special event at the academy. The principal agreed to organize a recital, inviting students, teachers, parents, and friends from the community. It would be a celebration not only of music but of resilience and the human spirit. On the night of the recital, the hall was filled with anticipation. The audience settled into their seats, the soft lighting highlighting the grand piano at center stage. The janitor sat backstage feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. This was different from performing someone else's music. This was his own story, laid bare through melody and harmony. The students who had encouraged him gave him reassuring smiles, and he felt a quiet strength building within him. When his turn came, the principal introduced him. Speaking of his journey from an unnoticed janitor to an inspiring musician and mentor, the janitor walked onto the stage, bowed politely, and sat at the piano. The hall grew silent as he placed his hands on the keys. He began to play. The composition started softly, each note deliberate and expressive. The audience listened, captivated by the depth of feeling conveyed through the music. The melody flowed like a river, carrying the experiences of a lifetime, childhood dreams, love shared and lost, years of quiet perseverance, and finally, the rediscovery of his passion. The music was intimate yet powerful, resonating with everyone who heard it. As the piece progressed, the janitor's confidence grew. His fingers moved with grace and precision, each chord reflecting the emotions he had carried for so long. The audience was silent, immersed in the story unfolding through sound. Some were moved to tears while others held their breath, experiencing the music as if it were their own. The students who had once looked past him as a janitor now saw him in a new light, not just as a teacher, but as a living example of courage and dedication. When the final note resonated and faded into silence, the hall remained quiet for a heartbeat before erupting into applause. The janitor stood, bowing deeply, overwhelmed by the response. The sound of clapping, cheering, and heartfelt admiration filled the room. For the first time in decades, he felt truly seen, not just for his music, but for the life he had lived, the struggles he had faced, and the resilience he had shown. After the recital, students and teachers surrounded him, praising his composition, asking questions, and expressing gratitude. Many were inspired to pursue their own passions with renewed determination. The janitor, who had once felt invisible, now realized that his story and music could make a lasting impact on others. In the days that followed, the academy continued to thrive with music, creativity, and connection. The janitor taught students, offered guidance, and shared his story, emphasizing the importance of perseverance, hope, and the courage to embrace second chances. His presence became a symbol of inspiration, showing that talent, dedication, and heart could transform lives. One afternoon, the janitor sat at the piano reflecting on his journey. He thought about the years of solitude, the pain of loss, and the joy of rediscovering his music. He realized that life had given him more than he could have imagined. By sharing his music, he had not only healed himself but had also touched the lives of countless others. The academy, once a place where he had only cleaned floors, had become a stage for his passion and a home for his heart. As he played a gentle, familiar melody, memories of his wife filled his mind. He smiled softly, feeling her presence in the music and in the life he had rebuilt. He understood that while the past could not be changed, the future was full of possibility. Through music, he had created a legacy that would endure, inspiring generations of students to come. The janitor continued to teach, perform, and compose, finding joy in every note and every interaction. The academy had become a place where dreams were nurtured, where students learned not only about music but about resilience, hope, and the power of believing in oneself. And the janitor, once overlooked and underestimated, had become a guiding light, showing everyone that no matter where life begins, it is never too late to share your gift and leave a lasting mark on the world. In the quiet moments, when the academy was empty and the hallways echoed with the memory of music, the janitor would sit at the piano, fingers gliding over the keys. He played for himself, for the students, and for the memory of his wife, letting the music carry him forward. And in those moments he felt complete, knowing that his life story, woven through music and perseverance, had found its place in the hearts of those who listened and learned from him. The halls, once just a place to clean, now resonated with melody, hope, and the enduring spirit of a man who refused to let life silence his gift.